Police officers of Reddit. What's the weirdest thing you've caught teenagers or kids doing that is illegal but you found hilarious? Not a cop. But I have a radio scanner. Dispatcher. Reports of a teenager riding a skateboard naked down Westway. Cop. Is the suspect carrying a suspicious package? I had a cop search my backpack once and found a couple of beers and a box of condoms. I was with my friends at the time, so he was like, "Why are there 3 beers? A box of condoms and 2 dudes?" I was speechless. My brother was a cop who worked nights in Minneapolis. One snowy night near the UOFM campus he noticed a car weaving. So he pulled them over thinking there would be alcohol involved. Nope, it was a car full of deaf people having an argument which included the driver. He just told the driver to not sign and drive. My brother was once jumping his bike off the end of the public boat dock behind the city hall, which also housed our police station. They had it tethered so it wouldn't get lost on the bottom. A cop came out, watched for a while and said, "I'm fairly certain something about that is illegal. But I can't figure out what, and it looks like fun. So be safe," and walked back inside. I remember this comment from Reddit years ago that must be a contender. So one of my friends is in a frat. They were having a party. And some guy was dressed up as Captain Jack Sparrow. Awesome. I know. Anyways. The cops show up. And the party is on the 3rd floor. Capt. Sparrow looks at them when they come in. Throws open the window and yells, "Gentlemen. You will forever remember this as the day you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow." And jumped out the window. Broke both legs. Still got his minor in possession. Reddit. r AskReddit comments, Lewins, most awkward weird something seen at a party, see 2ver40. A few years ago a friend and I were walking home through a residential estate, drunk. After a night out. About halfway home a police car pulls up next to us and says they need to talk to us. They say that CCTV in the area had observed us entering several front gardens. We then drunkenly explained that we had been going into people's gardens and swapping around flower pots, hanging baskets and garden ornaments with their next-door neighbors. One of the cops was laughing a lot and the other seemed really confused. Luckily they got another call and let us carry on our way. I didn't catch them. But when I arrived at my first station, after graduating from the academy, I was talking to some of the guys who had been there a while. I asked if they knew my cousin, who lived in that patrol area. Turns out they did. They had a call a few years back, of some kids driving around, pulling up next to cars at traffic lights, and waving a huge dildo at the drivers, laughing hysterically, then driving off. They were pulled over, brought down to the station, and parents were notified. There was one old-timer who was a bit of dick, telling me that my cousin was a pervert, as were his friends, but the others guys said they thought it was hilarious when it happened. And they never charged the kids with anything. I still mess with my cousin about that when I see him. When I was a teen, living in the Phoenix area, we would fill up the back of a pickup with shaved ice from behind the ice rink and then build snowmen in people's yards. We would do it at night before ringing and driving away. One time, a neighbor called the cops after hearing a group of teens sneaking around outside. The cop came by and found out what we were doing. Instead of getting after us, he told us to follow him somewhere. We ended up making a snowman in his own front yard. He rang the doorbell and hid around the corner while his wife came to the door and then his kids came out. There are some good cops out there. Not all of them are like the ones shooting people without cause. We were doing laps around a pond with a rope tied to my Jeep and another person wakeboarding behind holding onto the rope. The police officer pulled up on the nearest road, flashed his lights and motioned for us to come over to him. When we got there he just said, "That looks like a hell of a good time, but I'm getting tired of dispatch getting calls about y'all. Sorry guys. Save up some money and buy a boat." I'm not a police officer. Very sorry. But 2 kids at my school. One of them was a friend's brother, actually. Got drunk last year and climbed a 100+ foot crane. All the way to the top. Best part, the crane was directly across the street from the police station. They were noticed right away and arrested the second they came down. My dad always tells this story from when he was young and stupid in the 70s. Now he's old and stupid. Anyway, one of their friends is hanging out the sunroof while they're driving down the freeway. Naturally, they get pulled over. The cop comes to the window and says, "I don't know what, but I'm going to find something to ticket you for." He goes back to his cruiser and flips through his handbook for about 20 to 30 minutes. He finally comes back with this huge grin on his face, and says, "You over-exceeded the limits of your vehicle. Here's your ticket." Local PD SWAT team came and played airsoft with my team to help us practice. We got demolished every time against them, but they taught us tactics that helped us own our local field against other teams. I had a roommate in college that loved to tell this story. He drove a Jeep, and having a Jeep he loved messing around with it in snow. So one day he is driving down the highway during a snowstorm when he notices this building with a small parking lot off the highway. So he pulls in and proceeds to do donuts around this empty parking lot in the fresh snow. He then gets back on the highway. Not 30 seconds later he has blue lights flashing behind him. The cop comes up to his window and tells him, "Sir, if you're going to do donuts, please make sure you don't do them in the parking lot of the state police barracks." Sure enough, he looks back and there is a bunch of cops standing out behind the building laughing at him. When I was 16, my friend bought a '76 Lincoln Town Car. We took it for a joyride around my neighborhood. No plates, tags, registration, etc. I decided it would be a good idea to climb on the roof and ride the car like a surfboard. At that very instant, a police car turned in front of us and I knew we were absolutely screwed. The officer rolled down her window and said, "Guys, come on, you know that's not safe," in the nicest, most motherly tone. I quivered, "SSSS sorry," and climbed back in the car. She waved to us and went on her way. Greatest mom cop ever. There was a sheriff here in my hometown, 2,000 population, who had guard duty at the local jail on Thanksgiving. When he was handing out the dinner trays to the inmates, he dropped one and spilled the food everywhere. Since he was already pissed off about having to work that night, he said "frock it" and let all the inmates out to go eat Thanksgiving dinner with their families. They just had to be back when they were done. All of them came back except for 2. This was years ago. You can't do that shit nowadays. A gangbang in an abandoned house. All the kids thought they were in trouble. Then the girl comes out saying we ruined her party. The police showed up at my house after a noise complaint at 3 a.m. as my buddies and I were having an after party in my hot tub. But as no one brought trunks or spare clothes and we were royally frocked, we went in naked. 11 guys. Naked in a hot tub. The look on the police's face when we all climbed out was priceless. Not a cop, but worked IT for a couple of departments surrounding a bigger city. My company had to work along an IT manager until he was fired. The next day I was cleaning up and found a tiny bag of white powder. Called a police chief friend and he told me to bring it over to test. I did and was pulled over for rolling through a stop sign. I had the baggie clipped to my with-o board. Stupid move on my part. I was cuffed, stuffed, and then proceeded to an over 30-minute. Begged to call the chief session. Damn bastard set me up for a joke, I think, even though he swears he didn't. I see a lot of people posting who are not cops, so I will join in and tell my story. I was about 20 years old and I had a Chevy Astro van that I turned the back of it into a ball pit. Sitting in the parking lot of Wendy's, some friends and I were acting silly in the back. The cops came up to the van and knocked on the door. We had it set up so that you could only come in through the front 2 seats or else the balls would come flying out the side. Well, the cop knocks on the side and my friend instinctively opens the side sliding door, sending hundreds of ball pit balls crashing down his feet and into the parking lot. The cop laughed hysterically and had us pick up all the balls in the parking lot. Plus some garbage. I imagine he had a good laugh about that. My ex and his friends were mid-20s. But it's still a funny story. They were at a park playing with some new toys when some cops stopped them because they thought they were messing with weapons. What they were actually doing was having a lightsaber fight with their Force FX lightsabers. The cops joined them. Fun was had by all. I'm not a cop. But I have a story where I made a cop laugh. It was after I got arrested for stealing alcohol from Target and I was handcuffed to a rail on the wall of this room while I was waiting to be processed. The cop was just passing through and asked the guy being detained across from me what he did. The other guy, who was around my age, said he was there for retail theft, but he stole a bunch of jeans. Then he turned to me and asked the same question. After I told him I was there for stealing alcohol, he looked down at my shoes, which were a pair of really beat-up Chucks, started laughing and said, "Man, you should have tried to steal a new pair of shoes. Because those are frocked up." I couldn't help but laugh myself and he kept laughing to himself as he left the room. My friend's dad is a high-ranking police officer and an all-around great dude. One time when we were 12 years old, he offered to take us for a ride in his '67 Camaro, as he had just recently finished fixing it up nicely. We hopped in the car and he drove us around the city for 15 or 20 minutes. Then he took us to an empty parking lot behind what I think was an elementary school, and parked in the middle and just sat there for a minute, not saying anything. As soon as we asked why we were sitting there, he spun the wheel and floored the gas and busted out a series of screeching loud donuts that left us in a haze of tire smoke. Being 12 years old, I thought that sit was 10 times crazier than any roller coaster, haha. Definitely one for the books. Not that weird. But when I was the teenager, I was out with a couple friends after dark and I decided to moon some cars. Went for the triple whammy, but that third car turned out to be a patrol car. They loved it, telling us how they had just gotten done saying that no one ever does stupid sit in front of cops. Then whammo, there's your ass hanging out. They did a runaway check, then let me go and told me I made their night. In first year university, we have a jello slip and slide down the hall of one of our suites and had the entire floor packed with people sliding on it. We had literally garbage cans filled with jello which ended up everywhere on the walls and even on the ceiling in some places. Eventually the campus police show up and take one look at it and start laughing. We ended up talking to them and they said they had never seen anything like it in their entire careers. When I was 19, we had a drunk 4th of July where we set off fireworks on top of my hill. Some cops came and I ran home to hide the liquor while the rest of the group stayed. They told the group that it was funny when Chet shot Louis in the chest with a bottle rocket, but that we can't do that. They then went on their merry way. I'm not an officer of the law, but me and my friends used to take toilets people put out by the trash and place them in strange places. The best one we nabbed and spray painted gold and sat it atop the old Blockbuster building in the middle of town. Majestic as frock. That one made it in the newspaper. If I remember correctly, it stayed up there for like a month because no one knew how to get it down. Back in college, my nerd crew and I would routinely do odd things. Mostly to freak out the normies, but also out of boredom. One night we're in a parking lot, we get the cops called on us because there's about 20 of us engaged in a massive melee with foam swords. The cops show up, ask us some questions and then leave. A half hour later they show up again. Apparently their shift just ended and they wanted in on the action. They even brought pizza. Little late to the party. Some friends and I back in the college days were having a big cross-dressing party. A lot of the party was in the backyard around a campfire, when I suppose a neighbor had called the cops over noise or something. We see the telltale flashlights shining over our backyard fence, and somebody walks over and lets them in. They ask what we're up to, and explain they've gotten a complaint. We're having cross-dressing party. The cops respond. I see some girls with mustaches, but it doesn't look like you guys dressed up. Immediately, myself and about 6 or 7 other guys stand up, revealing our dresses, which I guess weren't obvious sitting down. The cops share a muffled but long chuckle, and tell us they don't want to hear any more calls. My science teacher told our class a story about how his dad, who is a cop, had to apprehend a vandal, whose whole big thing was that he used to write sit on sit. So he'd just go around and write the word sit on random things, like telephone poles and stop signs. It turned out it was one of my science teacher's friends when he was finally caught. I can break these cuffffss. You can't break those cuffs. Whenever I floated down the river in Folsom, CA, I'd enter into a restricted zone for Folsom Prison. I guess my loophole was that the point I started at didn't have any signs. The only sign was lower on the river that was only visible for people going upstream. Every single time, guards came out of the tower to tell us we couldn't be there. After a while, they started to know my friends and me. We were always technically leaving just as fast as the current could take us. Got a call about a large brawl on a field at a local park, received multiple calls, some saying it was upwards of 50 people involved and all had weapons. Every officer in the area responded to find about 30 kids LARPing. There was apparently some club that had made arrangements with a club from somewhere else to have a battle. Freshman year of college, we were in the dorm parking lot one night encasing our friend's car in cling wrap. We're about midway through when we see a campus police car pull up to the dorm and somebody points at us. He comes over and inspects our handiwork. Comments that at least we're not using hair dryers to make it melt together. Brilliant idea. And says, well, I'm going to say that I've asked you to remove it. Have a nice night. And drives off. I went to a friend's house party. And we were drinking. What I didn't realize is that his roommate is a cop. And I'm underage. I found out he was a cop 2 drinks in. Small party among friends. So avoiding him wasn't possible. Everyone else is old enough, so maybe the age won't come up. I won't get into one-on-one conversation with him and it'll be fine. 10 minutes later, he asks how old I am. Internally, I'm thinking. Frock. Sit. I tell him my age. He gives me a funny look. And asks who drove me here. I tell him I did and the only thing he said was, keys. I gave them to him and we proceeded to party. Not a cop but had the cops called on me at my old apartment. Apparently one of our neighbors reported a crazy man talking to himself and hurting people. I was DMing a particularly intense session of D&D. The cops thought it was hilarious and asked if they could watch for a couple minutes. Ended up just asking us to try to keep it down and left. Sophomore year of college. I'm 20, which is underage in Missouri. 6 friends and I went way back off in the river bottoms with a keg, all sorts of food. Camping gear. We had just started the barbecue when we saw headlights slowing coming through the trees. 5 of us scattered into the night. Missouri State Police trooper got out. Looked around. Smiled at Jeff, who was 22. And asked where everybody went. Jeff bobbled around. Something about he was by himself. The trooper laughed and asked everyone to come on in. He quizzed us pretty good about any plans for driving. We had none. Smiled again and drove out.